We're going to get started. My name is Sarah Redfield. I'm on the faculty at Franklin Pierce Law Center, which is the law school in New Hampshire. I also am the director of the Education Law Institute there, which offers a degree in education law, master's in education law. And I'm going to let John introduce himself, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do here.
My name is John Farragut. I'm tempted to say I'm on the faculty at CUNY Law School, which is the law school in New York, but there are those who might argue otherwise. I've been there for a long time at this point, and I've been teaching various kinds of things online for about the last 5 years, including this summer, for instance, with Sarah's Education Law Institute, an online course for people who are in that program on special education law. So that's a purely distant course from my vantage point. But I also use the web for my classes at CUNY that I'm teaching face-to-face as an adjunct to it. So that's who I am.
So I should have said in my introduction that I've been teaching online courses in our Masters of Education program for 5 years now, first using Twen and now using eCollege, and soon, as my law school makes its own decisions, using yet another platform. So what we had in mind for this group, first I want to tell you that this may be the only presentation you come to here that does not have PowerPoint slides.
Yes.
Are you ready? Can you stand it?
And lights up at full. Right?
And the lights are on, right? So,
yeah.
And we chose the no PowerPoint slides and the lights on because we really wanted to make this a brainstorm session, not a we tell you session. So what we'd like to do, we have the belief, and I've now heard a couple of you speak here today, and I think you share this belief, that there are things you can do using online technology and online pedagogy that you can't do as well in a face-to-face class. Now, I know lots of people think you can do everything the best in a face-to-face class, but we think there are some things, anyway, you can do better using online technology, and that's what we want to talk about, both our experiences in our classes, and we're hoping that we will hear from you, your experiences and your ideas about what those things might be. So I'd like to start by just getting a feel for who's in the group, and I think there are too many of you for me to ask you all to introduce yourselves individually, but could we see in the group how many of you are teachers versus librarians? How many of you are teachers? Almost all. Okay. Librarians? Administrators? IT people? Technology people?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a great group, a lot of different kinds of people here. And of all of you, how many of you have taught a purely online course? Oh, none. John. Oh, wow. Hi. And what do you teach?
Of course, on law and the internet.
Of course. It was so predictable, wasn't it? And where do you teach?
The medium and the message.
Yeah, right. It's a very self-referential course, right?
I work at State University, and I've been doing it since the summer of '95.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of you have taught a part online course? No, you have. I heard him speak a few minutes ago. Well, you use web support and email and all the tools of online for your regular, I guess I'd call it regular classes. More, now that I've defined my terms? Yeah. And the rest of you are here just to be inspired?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So we have a short list, not so short, of things that we think are really great about online that you can do better than you can do face-to-face. And we'd like to start to work through them and invite you to contribute, interrupt, ask questions, tell us this isn't what you wanted to hear, whatever, okay? So John, I'll start with my first one.
Well, I should say, I think to a certain extent, characteristically, we've got this allocated out, and Sarah's got half full, and I've got half empty, because I have a slightly less positive take on everything. And why don't you start with one? I have some sort of things I think of as paradoxes and reservations that I'd put out as well,
okay.
But along the way.
You'd all be pleased to know that at my law school faculty, I would be the glass half empty one. So this is sort of a new experience for me. I guess the first thing that I would suggest that I've liked about online teaching is the capacity for immediate and individual feedback. So, for example, I require students near the beginning of my course to brief cases. And both learn the technique of briefing cases, also the substance of the case. And when they do, they submit it online, and they immediately get back mine. Now, they don't get back a corrected one of theirs, but they immediately get back my brief of the case so they can compare what they did to what I did, and it's instantaneous. So you get that, oh, did I do it right? Oh, did I do it right? Piece over with right away. So that's, I think, a real plus. And the same thing is true for quizzes. As you can imagine, you can do short answer or multiple choice quizzes that way, and immediately they get back the right answers, their scores, and cues to, I set it up so they get cues to what they missed. So if you get question 3 wrong, you can read the little note that says, here's the explanation of the right answer. If you miss this, you might want to go back and reread thus and such. So again, it's really quick. And I find students love that. There's no waiting in the hall to talk to the professor. You know, there's no waiting for the professor to answer your phone call. You can see right away what you got and what you didn't.
And interesting, I think this, as we discussed when we were talking this through, this points out that a lot of what one thinks about. No, it's okay. Bridge to Kirk. A lot of this stuff is not necessarily an intrinsic distinction between teaching online and teaching face-to-face, because as I mentioned to Sarah, I do that with my students face-to-face. The way I work with my students is that I schedule their work to be due at a conference with me. And they show up, they turn it in, I read it with them, grade it, and give it back to them, and we talk about it. And it's an interactive process. So they get immediate feedback in a face-to-face setting as well. The dynamics are very different, right? One of the things is we're both in the room together. And that's better for some students, and I think worse for others. Because another item on your list is anonymity.
Anonymity, right. The next thing that I think is, again, and John, we're going to do the pros and cons of this, but one of the things that I think is really turns out surprising to me to be valuable is that students have some degree of anonymity. So I've had students in my class, my online class, whom I have never met personally. I may never meet personally. Last semester I had a student in Germany, one in the Virgin Islands, one in California. Now I hope to meet them all, but I never have.
I'm the law school's nickel.
Huh? I'm the law school's nickel, absolutely. Yeah. Where's my dean? He's not here. So I think that what that makes is a place for people to find themselves, as some women would say, in their own voice. So the first time I taught an online class, I'll give you this example. Now, it's not total anonymity, but it's space. There's a student who was in my regular live administrative law class, and he was English was his second language, Japanese was his first language. And during my administrative law class, he never said a word, right? Even when called on, he would try to hide, right? And if he saw me in the hall, he would hide, hang his head, not speak to me. And when he signed on for the online class, the first thing he did in the introductions was say, I'm taking this class because I have difficulty with language. And everyone else in the class, 20 other people, immediately leaped to his support. Oh, don't worry, we don't know all the vocabulary either. Oh, you'll see, it'll be fine, we'll help you. And over the course of that class, he went from somebody who was afraid to communicate face-to-face, which had been demonstrated for an entire term. He was totally afraid to communicate. And I'm really not that intimidating. I don't harass people. To someone who communicated. And at the end of the term, he came by my office to see me and showed me a picture of his new baby. And so starting out in a somewhat anonymous place really helped him, I think. So there's the anonymity piece. People get to establish themselves at their own pace. They're not being watched. They're not being sort of crowded in upon in class. And for some personalities, and I would say for many women, judging by my experience with women students especially, that is really helpful for them to find their own pace in that sort of anonymous place. The other group of students that this is a potential boon for are disabled students who do not have the facility to physically be somewhere or do not have the facility sometimes to speak. So there's a whole population of students that I think this is going to allow us to reach that we would not be able to reach in a classroom like this, which I'm sure is handicapped accessible somehow. But
an anecdote of sorts. How many? But another show of hands. How many of you have, I guess, male children between the ages of 8 and 35, somewhere in there? So you've probably spent a fair amount of time in video arcades, those of you who've raised your hand. No? So how many of those of you who raise your hands have, in fact, spent time with your kid watching a video game that the kid is playing and or in a video? An anecdote of that was telling to me, because I grew up as a teacher in the early 70s, and at that point in time, criticizing when students was thought to be sort of a capital offense, and the notion of competition was a very, was really banished from the lesson plan at the ed school that I went to. And the thought was you would damage little egos. And I really got to about 7 years ago with the notion that criticizing people hurts them in the context of learning, in the context of their learning. And I was standing next to my kid, having taught with that premise fairly squarely in hand for about 15 years at the time. And I'm standing next to my kid in this video arcade, watching him, but also watching a whole lot of other kids at these machines, standing there, cranking money into a machine that was telling them systematically, "You're dead, you're a failure." Right? And what is their response to that? Another quarter into the box. Right? And that suggested to me that there was something different about that machine telling them that they had gotten something wrong than the response I typically got in the classroom, when in a Socratic context I would say something like, "You're dead, you're a failure, here's a dime, go out and call your mother and tell her there is serious doubt about your ever becoming a lawyer." Right? But that's what the machine says. That's exactly, it's not figurative, you're dead. Your character blows up, there's blood on the screen. It's real dead. That means, on some level, that it's not about judgment and it's not about criticism, but it's about something else in the interaction. And one piece of that, I think, is the anonymity. That the machine, even though it's judging you, is in some sense, it's okay, it's just between you and the chip. No other person is going to necessarily listen in on the critique. And that anonymity is very freeing for some number of students. An interesting piece of it, half empty, is that for another group of students, it doesn't work so well. And that if you teach people in both settings simultaneously, that's to say, if you teach an online course to people whom you also teach face-to-face, at least 3 of my colleagues' experience and mine has consistently been that it's different people who speak. Some people speak in class, and some people speak online, and they're different, and it's not better or worse. It's not like the better people speak in class, but it's also not the better people speak online. They're different people, and there are shy people in each medium. And that's an interesting challenge, and one that if you have thoughts about how one can sort of tease that out of people, I think that's a piece of what we're trying to sort of brainstorm.
Yes. But don't you find it's synonymous? People say anything, whereas if somebody's getting out in a classroom where they're meeting face-to-face with a professor, they may think a little bit hard about what they say. They may put more quality into either what they put in writing or what they say, because they're going to be judged on it. Even if you evaluate a student and you know who he or she is, but if it's done by an email, somebody, for example, send you a brief that they like, and you critique it. If you criticize it by email, they can take that criticism a lot more easily than if you go into it. If he or she comes into your office and you say this is the worst thing, you put like 2 seconds into doing this, and I can tell.
Okay.
So I think that's the other side, is how the student reacts to it and what they put into it.
I think that what John's saying and what you're saying are really the same thing, that the students do react with less angst, I guess, when they get that poor grade from the computer than when they get it from you face to face. And I perhaps,
all but one.
All but one.
Who I changed my phone.
Never mind, right?
Yeah.
We both know this one. But I misused the word anonymous, perhaps, or overstated it. The students that I've had in online classes participate by their name. So they're not divorced from what's written, and they take some pride in what's written. The one piece that I found that I've done anonymously that's really worked and is consistent with what John says is I practice exams. They're not going to, quizzes, if you will, they're not going to count for your grade. And you take them, and I only know that you took it. So if you only got 2 questions right, I don't know it, no one else knows it but you. And then you know that you should go look at the other 8 questions. And I found on my evaluations that students really like that. It's feedback directly to them about what they know and what they don't, how to learn the rest, and they don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed. I mean, in the end, there's an exam that counts, and I know who they are. But along the way, those practice quizzes, people love them, and I think partly it's because they really are anonymous then, and because the machine is telling them, and they don't have to look me in the eye and admit they didn't do the reading, right?
And these things don't exist in vacuums, so they interact with each other. And another thing on the list, after, or before, but around anonymity, is reflection, the capacity for reflection. So that you're right, that especially if one reads a student-level email in any volume, it can sure make you feel old. The contractions, the typos, the little whatever smilicons and stupidicons and all of that stuff makes me always feel a little bit out of place. And you think to yourself, they're being very casual about this. Hey, prof, right? Stuff like that. Or I have every year there's 2 or 3 students who just address email to me routinely as Farrago dash, and then keep going from there. He
does that to me, John.
I don't know, but I early on invite them to address me in a variety of ways, and it's not on the list. Nevertheless, the asynchronous quality of doing this kind of teaching makes it possible for people to think before they speak or write. And I think that that's one of the reasons why some people who don't speak in class do speak online, is that they are concerned about wanting to get it right. There's a group of students for whom the wrapper, whether it is a written response or a spoken response, especially with ESL students, the wrapper comes to dominate the content when it's live and in class, the thing it's contained in, the speech act or the written act. And for those students, it's very liberating to be able to work it out and read it and edit it and revise it before they post it. And that group of people, I think, as a group, is the group that's more talkative online in guided discussions, right, where you've put out concrete questions. And so that counterbalances the sort of, I'm not accountable for this. You get the capacity for reflection, which is fairly profound, actually.
The next thing we've got on our list is, I guess, really a true use of technology one, and that is the ability to have more teachers in any given class than you would at your normal law school class. If I want to invite a guest speaker to my live class at the law school, well, first of all, I have to identify the person, pay them money, arrange it with my dean. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. That person, since I'm in New Hampshire, usually has to take a significant amount of time from his or her job to come to New Hampshire. So it becomes a big production, to say the least, other than to borrow somebody from Vermont or from Boston. But basically, it's a production. But in my online class, I asked somebody to record 10 minutes or half an hour of their expert views on something, and I put it in my class as real audio. And I take it as a little bit of an insult when, at the end of the year, the evaluations, what did you like best? I loved how I could just click on Frank Ravitch and hear about the First Amendment. And so there's a bit of, now Frank is a First Amendment expert, and I'm not, so I try not to take it too personally. But there is, there's cachet about getting an expert, and it's fairly easy to get an expert who you ask to record something for you for 10 or 20 or 30 minutes, as opposed to somebody who's got to take a day or two to come to your law school and teach for an hour. And students both love it. They think it's very neat. But they also benefit from it. I mean, the truth is, Frank's much better talking about those things than I am, and always will be. So there's that way of doing guest lectures. And then one of my colleagues this semester taught a course in international trade. And the course actually had its home base in Germany. And he used guest lectures online during online chat. So people in the class all were signed on at the same time, and the sort of key professor in Germany was there, but so were people from literally around the world who had various expertise, so that the students could pose questions and hear responses from, I think at one point he had 6 people at once. That seemed a lot to me. But anyway, of experts that they would never otherwise have had access to, never. So I think those people were glad to do it, because what did they have to do? They had to sit at home for half an hour or an hour and type on their computers. And my experience is most people like to teach, but the logistics of it stops them. And so in that context, you made it very easy to have expertise available to your students that you couldn't do. I mean, God knows my law school couldn't afford to fly those 6 people in from around the world. So you couldn't do that in a small school. You just wouldn't have a chance.
You can play with the context, because you can vary not just the geography, but the synchronicity of it, or the synchronousness of it. You can get, I have a colleague who brought somebody in to guest teach the class for the week. And what that meant was this person was committed a couple times a day to coming online, reading the students' postings, responding to the students' postings, writing a 3 or 4 page single-spaced sort of set of somewhere between a lecture and an assignment. There were readings outside the website, but it was their guidebook to the assignment. They could have read it, could have been done a streaming video. And then they were there all week long and interacting with the students, and it took 20 minutes a day in the morning, 20 minutes a day in the afternoon for 5 days. And they were very happy to do it. They were from Arizona. The course was taught in New York City to students in New York City primarily. And it was wonderful. It was a great experience for the students. We're beginning to develop a course, a module of a course. You can start thinking about permutations. A colleague of mine who's here, Bob Seidel, and I have been working on a judicial externship module. We have a judicial externship program that sort of has begun as a course. But before that, in my first year clinical skills course, that we call it lawyering seminar, I have been working and have been evolving a day-a-week judicial internship program with my students. They spend half a day to a day a week in a placement in a family court while they're taking family law. Each of the students is assigned to one judge, and the judge knows that this is not sort of high-end judicial externship work. This is the student is trying to learn what it's like inside a court and what it's like to think like a judge. So you can't ask them to do things like photocopy or research or anything you want, and it's a negotiation between the student and the judge. But you've got 20 students now in a class, all of whom are working in the New York City family court system, and they're working with 20 different judges. Those students can participate in an online discussion that the judges can participate in, the court attorneys can participate in, parties even, attorneys can participate in, court officers can participate in that discussion, off and on during the course of the semester to share observations, and nobody leaves their desk. Then you can add to that the fact that Bob is teaching an upper class judicial externship program and is using substantially the same online module to do it with. So his groupings can overlap with my groupings, and we can cross-fertilize each other's postings that way. And that's the sort of thing that we're now trying to work towards, is getting the 2 courses to be able to interact on occasion online, and then using this module in other courses as well.
So the next thing on our list is, I guess, a fairly obvious one, and all of you, I know this one, and that is the depth and breadth of other resources available on the web that you can have with one click of your mouse or whatever you're using these days. And we've seen it, I'm sure you've all seen in several of the presentations you've already been to here today, the sort of infinite use of URLs as further resources, so you can click into Lexis and find your case, or find one, find your case. But you can also find the background material for your course and for your subject matter. So in the educational class, in each one of my class segments, there's a section called Further Reading, And it hooks people up to anywhere between a dozen or 2 dozen other sites that are not necessarily law, but are commentary or background. They can read the story of a case. And I don't require those, but they're available to people. And John and I had an interesting conversation about this. He thinks that nobody uses them, that people are too straight and narrow, and they don't necessarily go out and take advantage of that. I'm not sure. I don't really know how to judge. I mean, I think some people in my class do use them based on what they feed back to me. But it says something about us, if it's true, that all people want to do is read the case, read the opinion, read the statute, and they don't want to know anything about what went on around it. I don't think it says something good about us. It just says something.
Well, it's an interesting. Here's my half-empty take on it. Is that I put a lot of stuff up on my website. That's what I was trying to. What do I do? There we go. I put a lot of stuff up on my website that.
Oh, look, John has already learned how to do all this, isn't he?
No. In a word. This is the course I was just sort of talking about that was a family law course that people were doing family court internships with. They also had mock clients that they were representing. Those 4 characters up there were simulated clients in this course that they do, whom they got to meet once in person, but for the rest of the semester, they interact with their clients through discussions online. And the way they get to that is by clicking on their client's face. The Judge Loria actually is the chief judge of the New York City Family Court System, and he's the person who helped us coordinate the placements. And he also is sort of accessible. He'll check in every so often and read what's online. But the reason I put this up is that I have almost all of the cases that they read here, online as well. And so you can get into almost any one of them. And what it pulls up is essentially a download from Westlaw. And as you can see, it's got the hot links from Westlaw. So if you have a Westlaw ID, you click on it, and it'll pull it up. It'll ask you for your Westlaw ID, and it'll take you into the case. And just like doing online legal research, you can move around. You can really navigate through all the case materials and get around and stuff. So I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, and I ask my students in detailed evaluations at the end of the semester, what do you think of this? Is it useful? And they say, no, I print them out and I read them offline. I still do it because it's just so exciting to me. But I don't find that it gets heavy use except for maybe 1 or 2 people a semester. I'm not sure what that means, but it concerns me because this is the better way to do the research. The better, to go out to other cases, to hit key numbers, to move around and navigate. And yet, they seem not to prefer that. I'm not sure. I just don't know what to do about it.
Excuse me. Are they not preferring to continue reading it up there, or are they actually going through what you want them to go through by hitting the links, but just when they get to the document, then...
They really just hit the case that I've assigned, print that case, and then read that case, and say, okay, I did the assignment. Again, those of you with kids between the ages of 8 and 35 are familiar with this. But, homework's done. Why? Well, because the teacher said I must do this, and I just did it. Homework's done. Yeah.
But what you're saying is they're not going out to the supplemental material that you're giving them?
Yeah.
Then that's a correlation between what we in libraries find that when professors put a lot of materials on reserve,
right.
Students never come and look at that material.
Right.
Literally never. And we send the sign-up records back to the professors to say, look, nobody's looking at this stuff, and they'll put it on reserve again next semester. So the message there, the lesson is students will do just what you tell them they have to do, and rarely will they go do any supplemental.
Right, and that's in some senses okay in a sense that people do that, but the nature of our profession is that we are in fact engaged routinely in a lateral task, in the task of legal research, and unless they're learning how to do that as well, right, as you know, they're missing a big piece of this, and if they only think about that in the context of their legal research course, then they're missing an even bigger piece of it on some level. And this is a context where they have a client, so it's not that I'm giving them a final at the end and they have to know this case, it's they have to serve those clients' needs. There was a,
I was going to say, when that happens, it's because you need to be clear about what's on file.
Yeah.
One small thing that I've done to help with this is that, especially near the beginning of the course, I require students to provide for me and their colleagues a set number of hyperlinks to something that they think is relevant to the subject. And so at least I know they go out and look for some background around search and seizure in schools or whatever the topic is for a little while, and then I hope that that's giving them the clue that that enriches what they're learning. But John, being the half-empty guy here, convinced me that that may not be right. I'm not absolutely sure.
I put all this stuff up that I write, but I have a menu of links to legal ethics places on the web, or to because this is basically a common law course, to Supreme Court things, or because I have to read their writing, all sorts of writing resources on the web. And because I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, each year each of those drop-down menus gets longer, but it doesn't get more hits. And you notice there's a hit counter at the bottom, and I've actually started trying to use an engine that lets me try and keep track of which pieces of the web, which pages get hit, and what can I say? I also do this detailed evaluation at the end. There are other things There are other things I do that I mess with. I link it to a database so they can check out movies from me. I have a library of movies that involve lawyers in heroic roles, so to sort of counteract, say, Ally McBeal, and so they can check them out on the website and not see them on the internet, but borrow them from me, stuff like that.
Yes?
I was interested in what you were saying about you keep adding more and more to it, but you're not getting any more hits. I'm not sure how this fits into, I'm not sure how my comment fits into what we're talking about here, which is how is the web going to help us with this. But I've had the same experience with my paper syllabus. Somebody will show up in my office in November and say, I really should have more problems to practice on, and I'll say, try the plan. So what was your where's that? Well, it's my syllabus.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
So this isn't a question of the medium.
Yeah.
It's not, and I don't, it's not a question of the medium unless it is true that the web medium can somehow be, they want to know when they want to know it. They don't, they read the syllabus, if I'm lucky, in August. They don't go back and look at it again in November when they want to know where's the time for practice. I guess to the extent that a web design is a better way to say through, facts or something, get them to it when they want to know it, then maybe it's helpful.
And it does give you access to things like Lexis or Westlaw cases that are richer resources than the casebook is, which just has notes cases at the end, and then they have to go to a library and find it or dial it up on Westlaw or something. So it does make it within clicking reach, which I believe, I have faith, but it's half-empty faith, that sooner or later that will hit critical mass and people will start doing it.
Well, it may also be a question of the age of our current students. I mean, I look at my children.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the way they do everything. If it's not on the web, there is no resource, right? I mean, they don't think a book exists. So it may be when that group gets to law school, we will find them taking more advantage of it. Yes?
Is there any evidence, either in your own experience or in the literature somewhere, that there's an improvement in performance for the students that have used your site or similar sites?
Sure, because I grade them.
Yeah.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In this course, it is sort of that, in the sense that I am grading them on client interaction. And 85% of their capacity for client interaction comes as they click into one of these discussion groups, which I may even have a password for. So that's how they can talk to their client. And they also had outside mentors that they were using then. And at the end of the semester, they were fairly, right, so they're students talking to mostly me. It happens, this client, his role was not to respond. Pick the bad one. But he was a caseworker for a child welfare agency in New York, and his role was, whatever your lawyer does, act like, just don't respond, just the way the client might. So the task for them was to figure out to see how they dealt with a client they couldn't reach. So But this is them knocking at his door. And the way I could tell, I graded them on how well they did this. But except for that, I don't know.
Well, there are now, I think, more and more studies comparing online learning with face-to-face learning, and I'm on a couple of listservs, and I see them sort of come across all the time, but I couldn't tell you at this minute. I would say from my own experience that I think it's as good, if not better. The end result is as good, if not better. But that's just anecdotal. I have not done what I probably should do, which is some kind of survey and comparison. But there have been semesters where I have taught both totally online and live the same exact, or to my mind, the same exact course. One of the things that you don't get online unless you do online chat, though, or some other sort of synchronous thing, is you don't always get it when they don't get it, because you give them the time to reflect. The opposite of the positive we were talking about before. You give students the question, you give them time to reflect, to compose their answer, maybe to ask their pal, maybe to look up a few things, maybe to whatever. They come with the answer eventually. Typically, they come with the answer eventually. What you don't know is if they've got that framework in their minds. And so John doesn't, I guess, use online chat in his class, but I do. I only do it a half an hour time, because that's enough for me. But I can watch from that who just doesn't answer. And then, or if everyone who answers on the quick, this is like class. Now answer my question, right? And you're still sitting there, right? So I get some message from that. Either you don't like my question, you don't understand my question, you don't know the answer. I get the same message in the online chat, and it's time real to me. And then I have the chance, which you would have in a live class too, to go back and say, well, none of you answered that question, or I didn't think everyone understood that question. Here are a few more points on that. And if you don't have that same time, sometimes I think as a professor you're missing what they're missing. You don't always have a way to know it.
I do also, yeah. I have a colleague at one of the ed schools at CUNY who did one of the early control group experiments where he did exactly what Sarah's done, which is teach the same course online and live. He graded the finals blind. He controlled for academic variables going into the course and assessed how well they did comparatively, and the online group consistently did better over a period of several iterations. He attributed that largely to the capacity for reflection, I think. But it was an early experiment. It was now about 7 years ago, I think, and a small n.
The other thing I would say that probably influences this is that in the totally online classes I teach, one of the advantages is anyone can take it, and it's totally voluntary if you take it, if you're not in our degree program. So people tend to be older. They tend to be working, and taking a class, and so they tend to come to it, I'd say, pretty committed. It's not a required first-year course in law school. So I think that motivation piece could also, be a big piece contributing to, you do better. Well, you do better because you wanted to be there, and you took on that commitment voluntarily, and I think that influences how well you do.
And over there was a, yes?
Yeah, I think you want to challenge the point that people were making that the lack of follow-up is due to other factors, not media-related factors, but I was wondering whether you find any effect in the way you design your pages. Do people find it easier to follow things that are embedded in the text, or
great question.
drop-down lists, which are considered to be very uninspiring for people to actually follow them?
Yeah, the stuff on the left is essentially a reference set. It's not part of the course, so it's meant to be sort of uninspiring.
I guess it is.
In that sense, it's a resource, and it's there, and I also have actually an in-class similar set of resources for them too. They don't seem to pursue. Actually, they pursue that more than the hyperlinked text within the materials, because the hyperlink text tends to be more peripheral stuff, actually, than the things that they're looking for concretely in the reference section. I've used 4 or 5 different authoring systems, and they have different front ends. I wound up designing this essentially as a navigation page. The text here is really an announcement section and nothing more. And it's really a navigation page to get to one of the discussion groups or to part of the reference things. And this is not a teaching page. But it doesn't seem to make too much difference.
I think that's a great question.
Yeah,
I don't
it really
know.
is.
Do you know the answer? Or do you have a feel for the answer?
No, I know that the theory says a drop-down list about usability experts say drop-down lists will not be used.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to apply.
No, well, I do both. There's a mix there. These are over here. These things are just direct links. And the drop-down lists are drop-down lists. The drop-down lists are hit more heavily than the links, but it's got to do with what the difference in content is, and not so much the. And maybe if I controlled for that, it would turn out that the direct links would get hit more, if I controlled for content. But the stuff in the drop-down list is copies of the assigned materials, so that they get hit harder than these sort of lateral links to other things they might be interested in.
I'm going to start asking that question on my evaluations. I think that would be really helpful to know. Because if it's that simple, relatively speaking, to present it in a different manner, then why not? We could all do it.
It's also different browsers handle drop-down lists very differently, and students don't like the fact that it's not consistent, it's not a consistent look, and they get confused often by it. So, how about the different folks? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, we have one last thing on our list, but shall we do it? Okay. The last thing on our list was that this environment provides some good opportunities, both synchronous and asynchronous, for working in groups. That I guess can also happen in face-to-face classes, but this tends to make it easy for people to communicate in groups, to post their documents for peer review, to attach things to get them reviewed that way. And both John and I assign group tasks in our online classes, and we were chatting at lunch about how people actually carried them out. And we concurred from what little we know is that most of them end up talking on the phone. So it is not, they don't continue to email each other when they have a group project. They often, at least, will call each other. But then they do use the online piece for posting drafts of their work and for commenting and editing. And then in my class, I required the group to post their work, and then the other groups can comment and ask questions about that. And I found that to be really effective. I think when you get your own colleague saying, I don't understand why you said thus and such, that is much more powerful than when you get me saying, I don't understand your reasoning here. It's just much more powerful. So I think that document sharing piece especially facilitates the group discussion.
And I think it's a good thing to learn as fledgling lawyers that you use different tools for different purposes. The telephone is synchronous, and if you can get the person at the other end at the right time, or if you can set up the conversation, and what you're trying to do is benefited by having a real-time component, the phone is a much better way to do it. On the other hand, if what you want to do is memorialize the transaction back and forth, something in writing is going to be better than a telephone call. And these things that say argument groups are, in fact, in the way this simulation works, a negotiation piece of a simulation. And there's a trade-off there. For the negotiations that are going somewhere productively, that are sort of win-win negotiations, the students are fine on the phone. But where they're coming to impasse, they start posting things because they want to memorialize their position. And it's there's an interesting sort of lawyering learning involved in doing things and seeing the difference that the medium makes, and that some media have different benefits than others. So, I'd add one other thing to our list, or just tease out, just that you mentioned it, which is that because it's because online stuff allows people to be anywhere and any time. Sarah's mentioned a couple times that the distance that people come from and the age that they tend to have, it makes the class richer. It's not just that more people can do it and it's more convenient for some people. The course I'm teaching this summer for Sarah's program includes a person who is whose work is as a teacher to follow the circus around and teach the children of the performers. So she's never in one place for more than 3 or 4 days at a time. She dials in through her cell phone and works online. Her experience is just totally different from any of the other students I've ever taught as among special ed teachers with respect to their work. And she writes about it and talks about it, and it comes in differently. Another student last year who was based in a military setting, a military school setting, coordinating special education plans for the children of the military. I had never given a thought how the federal law, how the federal system deals with the federal law. It's such a state-driven, state-delivered system. And she gave totally new insights into the way the system is used and works by virtue of where she was, and she could not have participated face-to-face. So that's another real piece of potential. But can you tell us some of the stuff that you do with the courses that, or pieces of courses or adjuncts to courses that you've used? Because there were some hands, and you started to. Can you tell us a little more?
Well, not specifically about the law on the internet,
right,
because it's sort of sui generis, and anyway, I'm doing a presentation on it tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so he's not getting any clues today.
I think it is very good. Where I'm going to talk about how it's evolved over the years and what I've learned about doing it online. Of course, one thing that I do in now in all of my courses that I did for the first time in the law on the internet course, one thing that I think is fairly typical of law schools is that we have our students do evaluations at the end of the course, which means it's absolutely, I mean, even if you respond to what's said in your evaluations, it's absolutely no use for students who actually did the evaluation, unless it's a continuing course. So one thing is I have, all of my courses now have a website which I call the continual evaluation website, to which students can post evaluations of the course as it's going on. And it's a very simple thing. It's just what's working, what's not working, and do you have any other comments about it? And in some of my courses, students have used that a lot, and I promise that I will change my behavior in response to it if I think I should, or I'll explain why I'm not changing my behavior if I think I should. And I found that really useful. And that's not something that it's not something that I would do with paper. I mean, you could have people.
Is it anonymous?
I was going to ask.
Anonymous,
Yeah. That's a great idea.
I've messed with an anonymous way into stuff like that, but I've also, I have in past years, I didn't this year, created a thing I call a John-free zone, where they can post stuff that I don't give myself privilege to see and promise not to change it. And let them also post it anonymously if they want. And it's a context in which they can sort of really complain about me bitterly and in hostile and nasty language, and they only see each other stuff there.
Well, yeah, I also use online forums in all of my classes, which are they're web-based but email as well. And one of the things that I find really interesting about that is students frequently forget that I'm there, and they will say things, they will go and they will have exchanges about what's going on, not necessarily about me, but they will have exchanges about in that context, which simply would not happen in the classroom. And sometimes they're just very interesting exchanges.
Have any of you experienced with feeling better about forums versus email versus listservs as a way to do instructional work? Forums being things that you have to get to by going to a page, direct email being things that you have to direct to a particular person, and listservs being things that come in via email, but everybody gets it as a group rather than, they're listservs. Yeah.
I found we have a day division and an evening division, and I found that the evening division students use all three of those things much more than the day division students do. I assume because they just don't have the access to each other in person or to meet in person, therefore and they're all working in jobs, so they can check during the day, and they usually use computers in their jobs, and they're familiar with technology. But I haven't had much luck with forums at all. I mean, almost everything I have email directly to me, even if it's posted in a forum, is really a question addressed to me. A little bit of them talking to each other, but not very much, mostly.
How many of you? Yes?
Stephanie?
I had an interesting observation. I haven't used the forums or the discussion or the listservs as much. I have used a little bit of email, and some of my colleagues have too. And one of the observations that I've had is that our students are not using email to post questions or communicate with us in the way that many other people seem to suggest that that's happening. And I'm wondering if it has to do also with the size of the class, with the accessibility of the faculty, or as you might have suggested, the fact that you have evening students who are using it a lot, because we're not a large law school, we're relatively small, we have about 500 students and 30-some faculty, and the sense is that the faculty are very accessible. We're only a day program, and very few of us have found that the students are using the email, whether we're using it just as a basic group or individual email, to ask those questions. And so that sense of anonymity that you're talking about doesn't seem to appeal to the students. And the only experience I really had was between a larger class of 70 students and a small class of 10 students. For the smaller class, if I posted assignments that way, they would read it because they had to. But other than that, very few of them would read their email on a regular basis, and none of them posted questions to me. In the larger class, a few students did. And so I'm not seeing that same kind of advantage to using these systems where the students seem to feel they have face-to-face access. I don't know if anybody else had that experience.
Part of it is our students are offsite. I guess that's what I'm saying. So even...
So you may be there, but they're not.
Right.
So you're not accessible to them.
Or it's midnight and they want to know something, which is, I think you haven't talked about this.
Right.
I think their whole 24/7 mentality gets applied to you. If they can access email at midnight, then they expect you to respond.
Right, by 2 a.m.
Post things at 10 o'clock or midnight when they're working on a case, and then are surprised that I haven't responded when I walk into class at 9 the next morning.
I've used all of the above over the years. I've had listservs and emails, and now I have discussion board. We're going to have a public discussion board, and now we use Blackboard, and so it's a password thing. And we have found this year that even our most curmudgeon professors are getting on Blackboard to use the discussion board. The students will not touch it except for the week before the exam. And the week before the exam, they all hop on it, and they're asking these questions. And as a faculty member, it's wonderful because instead of having the same question asked 100 times, I answer it once. It's there for everybody. My review sessions have gone from 2 hours to 30 minutes. And it's amazing. And then I used to try it, before we had discussion boards, I did it with email, but then I had a student who said, I just got on the list, sir, would you please send me the 30 emails that you sent throughout the semester? And now I can do, it's on the discussion board. And if someone sends me an email, I will post it on the discussion board and answer it on the discussion board.
There are listservs that generate a website that tracks the history of the listserv, and I'm very fond of those.
I actually had a bunch of conversations with students about that issue because I'm very good at responding to my email, and because I keep bizarre hours. I do respond often at 2 a.m., so they love that. But the reason the students have informed me that they don't use it a lot is because most professors have not been in the habit of responding, that a lot of people over the years tried it, and that a lot of the professors were not good about responding to questions that way, or the response would become seedy. The professor didn't want to take the time to write out the long answer, which often they are. Often or the question isn't clear, and you have to have a dialogue back and forth to figure out what it is. And I'll admit there are times where I just resort to, give me your phone number, I'll call you, it will be easier. But over time, I have found that I collect questions that way, and that if they're forced to write them down, they thought about them more. And often they answered their own question before they ever send it. And so I've had a lot of success with taking questions by email, but mostly I've been really good about getting back to people promptly, and word gets out about that, and I'm one of the few people, and we're also a small faculty, very accessible, but they use it with me because they find that it's the fastest way to get a response from me.
The way I teach is I'm with 20 students 8 hours a week in class. And then I'm meeting with each of them one-on-one for half an hour every other week. and even in that setting, which is pretty intimate, some of them use email. It's not a lot any given semester, but 3 or 4 every semester will identify. And as you say, there's this one guy who figured out that I'm up and reading my email at 5:15 in the morning, and Sarah and I found each other doing too. And he'll get online then and email me at 5:15 and get an answer at 5:20 and email me back at 5:22, and we'll go back and forth. And he's also found out what time I don't mind being called. And these are personality things, right? Some students do it and some don't.
I would follow up on what both Deb and you said, Stephanie. I would say at Franklin Pierce that it is totally professor dependent. Yeah. So some of my colleagues are really into technology, and they probably are like Deb. They commit themselves to answering the questions, and students know that, and they use it. And others are not, and the students sort of figure out the professor's personality. And responses, based on how strongly the professor says this is a really good tool, and not just says it but acts on it. I think that makes a big difference. But Tom, will you talk about what you said in the last presentation about you don't answer any questions? I loved this.
Right. Well, I got into the dilemma I brought out as well, where students were bombarding me with questions, and I did answer them almost immediately. And 2 years ago, I moved to a policy of not answering questions anymore. I forward them directly onto the class discussion forum, and if the class doesn't pick it up, then it wasn't an interesting question as far as I'm concerned. And by and large, the class does pick it up. Yeah. And I will only intervene when I see it going off the rails. So I view it and I see it happening. I see the thread of discussion, but I will not intervene unless it's heading in a direction I don't like, or unless I think the answer's wrong. But I want to see the class discuss it first before I get to it. And that holds back the questions too. The keeners get a little less keen when they know it's going to come in.
Are these first-year classes or are these upper-level classes?
Well, I teach first and upper year.
And you do that in your first-year classes too?
Yeah, first year especially.
They
know it right from the start. It's my syllabus. I will not answer questions.
I knew getting you to say this would start a conversation.
Sorry? They know from the beginning that you don't answer questions that way.
That's right.
It's not you don't respond, it's that you don't answer questions, right? I'm just going to get this clear.
This is a bunch of lawyers.
Somebody wrote you and said something like your shoelaces are on fire, or sent you information that way that you could use. You might respond to the student.
So I make a distinction. I say if it's about substantive issues, I will not respond. If it's about some sort of procedural thing, like we've changed class or something like that, or I can't make it today, I'll respond to that.
And you do respond, and you respond by posting it.
I was going to say, that's my response. Right? As long as I post it and look at it and watch it over time.
Well, we're near the end of our time. I guess I would agree with your comment about the negative piece of creating the idea, which Tom has found an answer to, that you are always available. I mean, that is difficult. And I sort of resolved it partway for myself by being available once a day. They can expect that I will read my emails and read what they've posted once a day. They cannot expect that I've read them every 10 minutes or every hour on the hour. And I'll just share this last sort of amusing story with you. Last year I was teaching, I went to New Orleans. I took my little laptop computer because, of course, I could teach anywhere. And for the life of me, I couldn't connect to anything from New Orleans. I mean, I don't know. Somebody from New Orleans, I don't know what this is unique to New Orleans.
It has to do with being...
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, it's below sea level,
Okay, I knew there was a reason. And when I got home 3 days later, my email was filled with, "Are you okay? We missed you." It wasn't critical, it wasn't nasty, but we got in the habit of knowing you signed on at 5 in the morning, and we missed you. So it's sort of an amusing comment on what students get used to and what they expect. Had I not shown up in class, they would not have had that concern about whether I was okay. They would have said, "Where the hell is she?" And okay, 10 minutes is gone, I'm out of here. Yeah. Sort of an interesting comment.
Let me ask one show of hands question, if I could. Just how many of you, following up on Stephanie's thing, how many of you are in schools where there is significant student use of email for academic purposes, being in touch with faculty, the sort of thing we've been talking about? Contact back and forth.
A lot. And growing,
And growing. And how many of you are at schools where The faculty use email substantially to communicate with each other about policy and pedagogy and just, you know. Yeah.
You guys don't talk to each other, right?
And of that group, of that group, the faculty question, how many are at schools where the faculty were using email that way 5 years ago? You know? And I think that's a piece of it, that there's a critical mass thing involved, that even in schools where the faculty are with each other all the time, every day, they're now using email heavily in the faculty, but not yet necessarily as heavily with students. But we've hit critical mass for faculty use of email, and we're moving towards that, I think, with students. The one other thing I would mention, just in terms of what you said, is I also, not with my email specifically, but with my discussion groups, have pulled out of my discussion groups by and large. Because I find that when I talk, the very people who have been talking here who didn't talk in class stop talking here. And so what I do is I say, you guys go for about a week, and I'll chime in at the end. And I'll try and resolve those of you who have a need for hearing what the professor thinks. I'll try and resolve that for you at the end and tie it all up. But otherwise, I was finding I was listening to myself a lot again, and I wasn't crazy about it. Yes, last.
Well, that question. Once you adopted that policy 2 years ago, what happened to the student question?
I get through a lot more material.
Today?
They get through a lot more material too.
Yeah.
And the questions did go down a lot more because let me put it this way, I realized a long time ago some people are asking questions, even though I've just said something, they ask the same question because that's the way they learn. They ask it as a question. They ask me back what I just said and put in different words. And so I get through a lot more of my classes. I've got a couple of weeks spare now at the end of the semester. I have 10% more time. Questions on the discussion forum, they go down a little bit, but not much, no. And the students don't ask me questions anymore. After about week 1, week 2 into the course, they post their questions directly onto the board.
Well, I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have. Both John's email and my email are in the book, so anyone... What?
5 in the morning, both of us.
At 5, I'll be reading what you said.
Both of us between 5 and 7 is a real good time.